Fantrax Fantasy Football Streams of the Week, talking quarterback, tight end, and defense and special teams. Will Levis faces Tampa Bay, who allowed the third most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and the second most passing yards per game this season. In the rookie's debut, he finished as the quarterback 6 that week, throwing 238 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Last week, in Will Levis's second game, it was a down fantasy scoring week. He was without a touchdown, he threw an interception, but he did throw for 262 yards, and he attempted 39 passes, which was more attempts than Ryan Tannehill has had in any of his 5 full games. So Levis has already had a big scoring fantasy week. He has a great matchup against the Buccaneers, and Tennessee is letting him sling it. Geno Smith faces the Washington Commanders, who allow the second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and the 6th most passing yards per game this season. Geno was the quarterback 8 in week 2, but then he's been the quarterback 15 or worse in all 7 of his other games. He did, though, have 10 weeks last season as a top 12 fantasy quarterback, and I think he has more weapons this year. He's had 2 games over 320 passing yards and 3 multi-touchdown games this year. And in a plus matchup with his trio of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think he has his best fantasy week of the season in week 10. Derek Carr faces Minnesota this week. Weeks 6 through 9, he has finished as the quarterback 10, quarterback 9, quarterback 13, and the quarterback 11. He's had a good stretch of games. The Vikings are not the best matchup, but they're a pretty decent one. They allow the 13th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. 4 games of 300-plus passing yards. He's had back-to weeks throwing a pair of touchdowns. I like Carr this week. 4 tight ends. Hunter Henry faces the Colts, who allow the 8th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. In Week 9, Hunter Henry played 88% of the snaps, which was the highest percent of snaps played since Week 2. In that game, he had 7 targets. He caught 4 of them, with 1 being a touchdown. It's been a quiet stretch of games for Hunter Henry, but he did open up the season as the tight end 1 and the tight end 2 for fantasy football in those games. Decent matchup. The usage is up. I like him this week. Cade Otton faces the Tennessee Titans, who are not necessarily a plus matchup, but he's coming off of a huge week. Last game, he caught 6 of his 9 targets for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns, 23 fantasy points. Otton has been targeted 6, and 9 times across the last 3 straight games and has yet to play under 91% of the snaps this season. So I like the consistency of targets and his role on this offense. Luke Musgrave faces the Steelers, who are not a great matchup either, but his role is solidified in the Green Bay offense. Week 9, he caught 3 passes for 51 yards and scored his first touchdown, playing 83% of the snaps. He previously had games of 7 and 8 targets this season. He's ranged from 67% to 88% of the snaps played in all but 1 game this year. Okay, for defense and special teams, I like the Raiders against the Jets this week. The Raiders had a monster 8 sacks in Week 9 along with 2 interceptions, giving up just 6 points to the Giants. Double-digit fantasy points Week 5 against Green Bay with 3 interceptions and 2 sacks. Also in Week 6 against the Patriots with 4 sacks. The Jets are generating the 2nd least total yards per game and the 3rd least points per game. So it's not a great offense. It's a good matchup. And also the Colts face the Patriots. Huge Week 9 for fantasy. The defense and special teams scored 2 touchdowns. They had 3 interceptions and 4 sacks. 3 games this season of 4+ sacks, 8 interceptions across the last 6 games. New England is scoring the 2nd least points per game and generating the 6th least total yards per game this season. It's a plus matchup. Follow us at Fantrax for consistent fantasy football content.